What is up, Breaking Bad fans? Kino here, and I'm back with another video responding to your hot takes. Now, if you haven't seen it, I did one of these videos a little while back about The Sopranos, where I responded to controversial opinions about the series from my community. That video was really fun. It seemed like people enjoyed watching that kind of stuff, and I figured I'd do it again for another show that I've covered extensively here on this channel, Breaking Bad. Now, I got these hot takes from the community posts I did on my channel here, as well as on Discord. If you haven't joined my Discord, definitely do that. The link is in the description of this video, but I usually poll people there if I ever have questions and want to include stuff like that in the video here. So definitely join it. It's a great community. Real quick before we get into the hot takes, I wanted to give a shout out. I realized I didn't do this in the previous video, but I wanted to give a shout out to Daniel Green, the YouTuber who actually inspired this style of video. He's a fantasy booktuber YouTuber, and he's done a lot of videos like this, kind of responding to hot takes about the fantasy genre. I really like his channel, and that was the inspiration behind doing this, so I figured I should give him some credit for inspiring this video. But without further ado, let's get into the video. These are your Breaking Bad hot takes. First up, we have from Jolly Man Big Boy. Felina is a mid-episode. It has plot contrivances, the framing feels misguided, and the final showdown wasn't satisfactory. There's a lot of stuff in this post here, I'm not going to read it all, but essentially in conclusion, the finale has always damaged my relationship with Breaking Bad as a whole. Now, that's an interesting opinion, and this is not the only person who feels that way. There were a lot of comments basically being like, Felina's not a good finale, and surprisingly, a lot of people said that Face Off, the season 4 finale, is a lot better of a finale for the show. I don't know if I agree with that. I feel like leaving it at the end of Face Off wouldn't have really resolved a lot of stuff. I mean, it ends on this big cliffhanger that Walt essentially poisoned Brock, so we need to resolve that. But I do understand why people have a problem with Felina. The episode does have problems. Surprisingly, one of the biggest ones for me is how happy of an ending Felina is, which is kind of weird to say. It ends with Walt dying in the meth lab, and he's estranged from his family and all this stuff. But when you look at it, he really does get everything he wants in the finale, right? He gets revenge on Jack's gang. He gets to give his money to his children through Elliot and Gretchen. He gets to kind of make up with Skyler a little bit. I mean, they're not like, their relationship is over, but they have this, understanding at the end of the episode that transcends a lot of the awfulness that's been with them throughout the series. He doesn't get to make up with Flynn or anything, but regardless, most of the threads are tied up in a way that is very satisfactory to Walt. I mean, what Walt wanted throughout most of the series was to be this legend, this Heisenberg, and he really cements that at the end. He gets to free Jesse, he gets all this stuff, which is definitely strange when you consider the genre that Breaking Bad is in. These kind of critically acclaimed character dramas like The Sopranos, Mad Men, Boardwalk Empire. I'm not going to spoil the finales of all those shows because this video is focused on Breaking Bad, but if you've watched any of those shows, they don't typically end in a very happy way. Maybe there's some elements of happiness for the main characters there, but usually it ends badly because these are like, dramas about morally gray characters. But Breaking Bad takes the route of being almost very celebratory to its main character. Yes, the series does admonish Walt for all the stuff he did with, there's that whole thing about, I did it for me that he tells Skyler at the end. But aside from that one line, it doesn't really feel like Walt suffers in this episode. Now, granted, he does a lot of suffering in the previous one, Granite State, but regardless of that, Felina is a very happy ending for Walt, and I can understand why that bothers some people. I do think it was a well-paced episode. I think, Breaking Bad has always leaned more into like action and pacing of storytelling rather than like deeper character work that you would see in something like The Sopranos or Mad Men. But, for what it is, I thought it was satisfactory. There's nothing like awful in it for me where I was like, oh man, this completely ruins the series. Breaking Bad is what it is. Essentially, it's an action show for a lot of it. Not to say that there isn't great character stuff in there, but for the thing that appeals to me about Breaking Bad was the pacing of the storytelling, and I think the finale lands that, even if maybe we could have, you know, been a little bit harsher to Walt for all the basically evil stuff he did throughout the series. So I like Felina for what it is. Do I think it's the best finale of any show like this? No, absolutely not. In fact, the best finale I've ever seen is the Mad Men finale, person to person. Definitely check out that series if you haven't seen it. But yeah, I think it's okay for what it is. I don't hate Felina at all. All right, next up here we have Bart is really cool saying, hot take, but the show tricks you into hating Skyler and then pretended it didn't. Like, of course we hate the person who's pumping the brakes on the meth train. At that point, the audience is craving more chaos and that classic gangster machismo. And Skyler is like, Walt, you are a husband and father, please stop killing people. And that's just not fun. I chose this comment in particular for a number of reasons. Now, the whole Skyler debate in the community is this really big thing. Skyler has become this character that represents more than just what she is. She represents part of the ongoing thing. I think people like to talk about media literacy, which I really, really hate that term. I think it's cringy. But essentially, there's a section of the audience who's like, oh, fuck Skyler. I hate Skyler. She's the worst. And there's people who defend Skyler being like, no, you don't understand. You know, Walt's the bad guy. Skyler didn't do anything wrong, which I agree with to an extent. Like, I do think there is a section of the audience that doesn't understand the show like that. And they kind of just hate Skyler for being a woman and being a nag. But the reason I chose this comment in particular is because I think that the discourse around Skyler has shifted completely too far in the opposite direction, where people are like, again, they use her as this like media literacy thing, being like, if you hate Skyler White in any way, if you think she did anything wrong, you're a stupid, you know, pleb tier, you don't understand Breaking Bad, you're an idiot, basically. And she's become this again source for people to basically act kind of smugly about the series, to be like, I understand Breaking Bad, you don't understand Breaking Bad. And I don't think that's really the right way to look at her. Skyler White definitely did do wrong things in the series. No one in the series is like 100% innocent, except for, again, maybe some like minor characters, some like maybe Brock is completely innocent. But in terms of like people who are actually doing stuff, Skyler was complicit throughout a lot of the series. Yes, Walt absolutely took the actions that forced that upon her, but we do see things about her like disregarding her lawyer's advice to go to the police and you know, tell them what Walt did. It's very similar, by the way, to the scene where Carmela and her therapist in Sopranos, if you've ever seen that scene. But she disregards that advice, right? She engages in the money laundering business. Yes, it's to help Hank and stuff like that, but you know, whatever her justifications were, she did wrong things. Now, is it to the level of Walt? No, absolutely not. She didn't kill anyone, but it's shown that she does enjoy the power that Walt's meth empire brings her to an extent, just like Walt. We see her with Ted Beneke when he's like scared, like senseless of her after his accident. He thinks, you know, she caused it, basically, even though it was an accident. When she's like, you know, she says at the end, she's like, good. And you can kind of see her like enjoying the power a little bit here. Now, granted, again, she's not sadistic or anything like that, but I think people are like, Skyler White did nothing wrong. I think that's oversimplifying her in the opposite direction. Again, I agree, the people who hate her for no reason, and especially the people who hate the actress, like, fuck those people. But I think it's gone too far in the opposite direction, the Skyler discourse, and that's why I chose this comment. Like, I really think that the first line is accurate. Like, the series does set you up to not like Skyler, and pretending like you never had that response to be like, God damn it, Skyler, why are you interfering with the meth empire and making the series more boring? That's a completely normal response, and I really hate the people who pretend like, oh, I only enjoyed the series for the, the complex themes or the character work. No, Breaking Bad is meant to be enjoyed as an action series too, as like oh, this is cool, he's blowing up buildings and killing people. Like, there is an appeal to that in the storytelling. In the same way, yes, The Wire is deep for its themes and stuff like that, but it's also like, it's fun. The Wire is a fun show. Sopranos is a fun show. Mad Men, even to a lesser extent, is a fun show. So I really don't like the people who pretend like it's all intellectual and there's nothing like emotionally satisfying about Walt's story in this series. I think there is, and you can appreciate it on those multiple levels. So again, Skyler's become kind of a nexus for this type of debate, which I think is pretty reductive overall, and I'm glad someone pointed this out. All right, next we have Jasta5657 saying, Walt, being a Nobel Prize winning chemist whose name was attached to a successful company, only to end up as a washed up public high school chemistry teacher, never really made sense or is really explained. Even with his arrogance, attitude, and insecurities and the Heisenberg fantasies, he should have found plenty of success after he left Gray Matter. I agree with this comment a lot. I think that Walt's backstory, there's some kind of disconnect happening there that it doesn't quite work the way I think they wanted it to. So let's go back to the beginning of the series, right? We see in flashbacks, and this is one of the problems, especially with the Gretchen and Elliot storyline, which, funny enough, no one actually brought up Gretchen and Elliot in the hot takes comments, but the backstory of Walt, Gretchen, and Elliot is this. Walt and Elliot had formed this kind of startup chemistry company, Gray Matter, and Gretchen was working there. She was a little bit younger than them. She was like a graduate student, and she was dating Walt at the time. Now, Gretchen came from money. She came from a very rich family, and Walt wasn't. He was from a poor family, and he felt this insecurity with being with her. Like, he felt like inferior to her and her family, and he broke up with her abruptly and left the company. He took a buyout for $5,000. Gretchen later hooked up with Elliot. They married, and they turned Gray Matter into this very successful billion-dollar pharmaceutical chemistry company. The reason why, again, Walt left her was because of his insecurity. He wanted to be the big man. He didn't want to be someone who's like, oh, I'm lesser to her because she's rich, and again, it's that ego Walt has. That's why he married Skyler. That's my headcanon for why he married Skyler, by the way. Skyler was this waitress working at a diner. She wasn't like a threat to him, like to his ego, right? He could be better than her, basically, as this, chemistry, master, whatever, breadwinner, whatever. So that's how he hooked up with her. They married, they got pregnant, and he took a job as a chemistry teacher temporarily while he was going to work on some other stuff, However, somewhere along those years when they had Flynn, and then they had their little suburban life, Walt became very meek. He avoided anything that like challenged him, because again, he didn't like that feeling of like feeling inferior to anyone. So he became this very like meek person who avoided any challenges. And that's where we're introduced to him at the beginning of in the pilot, where he's like this kind of weak beta male guy who's everyone walks all over him. Like Hank laughs at him, calls him a nerd. Basically, his wife gives him an unenthusiastic hand job on his birthday. He's become weak basically from avoiding challenges. However, there's some kind of disconnect here where that backstory isn't really landing properly for me. Like, either we can have him be this like egomaniac who's like avoiding, who wants to be like the big man basically, or we can have him be this weak male, but having them both be that background kind of doesn't work. Like the pilot, that's the first, we're introduced to him. That leans more to him just being a weak person overall and wanting to be strong, versus later on in the series, we introduce this backstory and it's related more to his ego. but there's some kind of disconnect there where those two story ideas don't really mesh well. So I do agree with this thing that, like, I think Walt's backstory could have been framed a little bit differently. It's just in the pilot, they really want you to sympathize with Walt, and so they make him this kind of guy who's constantly being, you know, stepped on and put in, you know, like, because a lot of people can relate to that feeling. So I agree that Walt's backstory is a little bit weird. All right, next up we have from Romalot 3000. Mike is absolutely just as terrible as Walt. Since this is a Breaking Bad topic, I'll leave out Better Call Saul. Mike must have known that children were peddling blue sky for Gustavo, and Mike had no qualms about it. Even though he's supposed to be such a morally gray guy, he didn't even show any sort of emotion after Gus put out a hit on Tomas. Tomas, sorry. I like Mike, but he is not morally gray in the least. I disagree that he's not morally gray, but I do agree with this comment basically being like, the community like puts like Mike on a pedestal. They think he's like one of the good ones. No, absolutely not. Mike is a horrible human being, just like Walt and Jesse. In fact, there's this funny 4chan Green post about Mike confronting Walt about the meth empire, and he's like, you know, we had it all, you stupid son of a bitch. We had a child-killing drug lord that we all worked for, which is, again, pointing out that, like, despite Mike's kind of statements to Walt that everything was working perfectly before he joined, like, no, this was a fucked up organization that Gus was running. We see that in Better Call Saul, which, again, I know we're not getting into Better Call Saul here, but like, Tomas was not the first innocent that had died because of the drug business that Gus was running here. So I agree that Mike is not nearly as perfect as the community. Like, he's very likable because he has this kind of sense of being an honorable criminal. But regardless of that, he's still complicit in a lot of evil stuff. And definitely, if you watch Better Call Saul, we see that transformation more, where in the beginning he's very concerned about this stuff, but by the time we get to Breaking Bad, he's like, he's not out there like being cruel. He's not sadistic, but you know, he's gonna do what he has to do to protect his interests, including, you know, if children die in this process, it's like, yeah, you know, it's just the business. So I agree that Mike is not nearly as good as some of the community really think he is. And conversely, Walt's problems with Gus's empire, I don't believe is fully on him. Like, yes, he absolutely was responsible for breaking down a lot of that relationship, but again, this is a drug empire that is killing people, and I think there was going to be conflict no matter what, especially with Jesse involved in the mix there. So definitely agree that Mike is more on the gray side than people normally make him out to be. All right, Paul W says, Better Call Saul is just better than Breaking Bad, my hot take. Now, I'm going to do one of these for Better Call Saul eventually, so I don't want to get into a whole thing about Better Call Saul here, but this is one that I strongly disagree with, and I know a lot of my audience out there really doesn't like my critiques of Better Call Saul, but I think Breaking Bad is better than Better Call Saul. Mainly, again, because of the pacing. I agree that some of the character stuff in Better Call Saul is better than Breaking Bad. It's deeper, it's more complex, but the story of Better Call Saul is not nearly as paced well. Like, especially the final season, and even before that too, really starting in season 5. There's stuff like the cartel storyline that I think just fundamentally doesn't work. It detracts from the show, and it ruins the pacing of what otherwise would have been probably a better show overall. So I know that a lot of people are going to disagree with me on that. A lot of you have seen my video about Lalo. I promise you that's not like me being like a troll. That's not me trying to like farm hate views or anything like that. That is genuinely how I feel about Lalo. I think he is a mistake on the show's part. I think he fundamentally, his purpose on the show does not work. The cartel storyline in Better Call Saul does not work. And if you enjoy it, great. All power to you. I'm not a hater on Better Call Saul. I think it's a really great show. But for me, even though Breaking Bad is simpler in a lot of ways, the story is so much more well-paced that I appreciate Breaking Bad more. It doesn't meander in the way that Better Call Saul does for me. So gonna disagree with this hot take, but I'm sure a lot of you are gonna hate me for that opinion no matter what, so we'll leave it there. All right, next up, Shark Boy 8856 says, the Marie Klepto storyline is pretty great in concept to have another character's portrayal of Breaking Bad. However, it could have been handled better instead of dropping it for like 2 seasons and then coming back randomly in season 4 just to fill time. This is an interesting comment. I hadn't actually thought about it this way, but you're right in the sense that Marie's kleptomania, one, it's a character thing about her, right? It's like the season 4 thing is her reaction to Hank basically being a jerk to her when he's in recovery. But regardless of that part of it, it is showing that like all of these characters are Breaking Bad in some way, right? We see Hank, Marie, Skyler, Jesse, all these characters have these kind of immoral stuff that they do throughout the show, and it's kind of showing that like all these characters are kind of complicit in some way in the bad stuff that's going on in the series. Again, not to say that they're worse than Walt. I think Walt is one of the worst ones. I mean, maybe some of the cartel people are worse than him overall, but regardless, no one's hands are clean in this series, right? If you're a main character, at least, right? Everyone is guilty of something in some way. And I think that is what Marie's Klepto storyline was trying to hint at. But I do agree with you that it was kind of just brought up here and there, and it wasn't really like expanded upon. That's arguably one thing that makes Breaking Bad so well paced, is that the focus is entirely throughout most of the show on Walt and Jesse, and then a little bit on characters like Hank and Gus and stuff like that. But characters like Marie kind of get shorted with storylines. Like, maybe the show could have handled this better if they had devoted more screen time to Marie and developed her more as a character. But then we might get into the Better Call Saul problem, which is this kind of meandering? Is it not focused enough on the quick-moving, fast-paced action of Breaking Bad? So that's just one of the trade-offs Breaking Bad makes with its kind of very quick pacing. But for me, the pacing works out well enough that even though there are some weird elements like Marie's kleptomania, I don't necessarily know if it would have been better to explore that more. So, all right, Brady King 9778 says, around 2/3 of the show's audience misinterprets the whole point of the show. Again, this is kind of going back to that media literacy thing, which is like, it's not that I disagree with the idea that there are people who are just like, hell yeah, Walt, deal drugs. Hell yeah, Walt, be a fucking alpha male. This is my idea of like what it means to be a man. I absolutely acknowledge there's people out there, but I think that, again, a lot of this discourse around media literacy is basically, kind of smug people basically being like, I understand the show better than you do. And it's like the simple enjoyment of Breaking Bad, if you just enjoy Breaking Bad as a simple, like, cool, this is a badass kind of thing, you're perfectly valid in enjoying it that way. I think a lot of these media literacy people pretend like, again, the Sopranos, Boardwalk Empire, Mad Men have no entertainment value aside from their themes and character stuff. And I know I've been guilty of that too at times, basically acting like I know the show better than other people. But really, like, again, there's no wrong way to enjoy these shows, no matter what fucking, soy boy Twitter people will tell you. Like, you can enjoy the show any way you want to. It doesn't exist only to be looked at through one simple lens. And I think a lot of like Twitter film bro crowds can get too much into enjoying it only through this like analytical lens, and you forget that, like, no, these shows are just fun on their own. So again, I know I hammered this point home in the Skyler White section, but I really do dislike a lot of this discourse, and I think you can enjoy the show any way you want to. If you want to just have fun with it and just enjoy it that way, all power to you. I'm not going to shame you, and fuck any of these media literacy people that do. So, all right, and last up here, I think this is the last comment. We have from Latvian Dragon 2718. Fly is one of the best episodes of this series. Now, for those of you who don't know, the episode Fly is one of the most controversial ones in the community. When it came out, there were a lot of people who disliked it, and it's gotten this reputation of being like again, kind of like the Skyler White stuff, there's people who like really defend it as like, no, this is the best episode of the series, kind of being contrarians about it a little bit. But surprisingly, when I polled my audience, when I was doing my Breaking Bad logs, and I did the episode Fly, I polled my audience to be like, what do you guys think about this episode? And surprisingly, most people nowadays actually think it's a good episode. And one of the reasons for that, I believe, is because now that the show is all out there, you can binge it all on Netflix or, you know, whatever streaming site it has it on. You can just watch all the episodes straight through. So even though Fly is this very self-contained bottle episode, which takes place primarily in the lab, it was done for budget reasons. They had ran out of budget for that season, so they had to film this really cheap episode which basically just has Walt and Jesse in the lab the entire time. Even though that episode can be a little bit contained, it's a lot easier to get through nowadays because you can just immediately watch the next one. One of the reasons why people didn't like Fly when it first came out was because if that was the one Breaking Bad episode you got that week, I could feel you being like what the hell? Like, where's the plot? You know, like, and that episode came out at a time where there was like conflict brewing between Gus and Walt. So a lot of people were like, I want to focus more on that. Why are we doing this weird kind of bottle episode here? But you know, setting that aside, I think Fly is actually a really good episode. I think it's a really cool, self-contained story that it's like the calm before the storm. In fact, it takes place at about the halfway point of the series. I don't know if it's exactly halfway or not, I can't remember, but it's like this calm before the storm, and really once we get past Fly, the plot really starts picking up at the end of season 3 and throughout season 4 and 5 too. So I appreciate this episode as a bottle episode, and I think it's a really good one for what it is. And that's pretty much all the hot takes we have for now. So thank you all for those of you who sent in the hot takes. I'm planning on doing this for more shows. I'm going to do this kind of sporadically, not back to back like this. I'll kind of pepper it in throughout my videos, but really enjoy responding to this and having like these kind of discussions about stuff in the series with all of you, because, you know, these shows are very divisive. People appreciate them in different ways. People have different opinions. I have my own hot takes about these shows. So I'm really happy I get to discuss it all with you guys. Definitely check out my Discord if you haven't seen it. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't done that already. And stay tuned for more great content coming soon. You know what's not a hot take? How great my patrons are. Matt Joyce, Uncle Mike, Sam Cedarland, Celery Man, Countess von Zarevich, and Admiral.